Hey there, everyone. Hope you're all healthy, fine, and hopefully already as deconfined as possible in these days. And welcome to the new video in the Bailout series, this time about British Airways, as you can see here, with one of its beautiful A380s. And therefore, without further ado, let's go to the first board. So let's look at British Airways then. So the thing with British Airways is that actually, I mean, technically it's still the bailout series, but British Airways, as the third example, is actually an airline that has not asked for a bailout as such, which doesn't mean that they're not in big trouble as other major airlines as well, and as the industry as a whole. But I thought it would be interesting to look at this case at this moment because it's all over the news, especially in the UK, but in general, globally, big news outlets are all over the company and what is happening there. And I think that this is, let's say, the other extreme of airlines who officially don't ask for bailouts, but who nonetheless have a very interesting case and a case which is worth looking at how they're dealing with the situation. So as in the first board, let me tell you that British Airways is not just the airline as such, but its structure is actually far more complicated than just a regular British and international airline. But it is actually officially member of the International Airlines Group, which has been founded after 9/11 and in the aftermath of the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. And the two big airlines that are members of this International Airlines Group are British Airways, Iberia, the flag carrier of Spain, also Vueling, who I did not put on the board, but another Spanish airline, a smaller one, as well as Aer Lingus, the Irish flag carrier. So this second airline, let's say, in terms of size after Ryanair, which is also originally based in Ireland. But those three major airlines, and especially British Airways and Iberia, take part or are biggest partners of the International Airlines Group. The International Airlines Group holds offices in Madrid and London. They're also officially registered in the stock exchanges of both capitals and both countries, whereas the, let's say, registered main office is in Madrid, but the operational headquarters actually are in London. So when you hear IAG, as their abbreviation goes, decisions or any statements by the IAG, then most of them come from its CEO, Willie Walsh, who sits in London. But interestingly as well, Qatar Airways has in recent years bought themselves quite major shares. They started with 9.99% of shares in the International Airlines Group, and they have completed by February this year a 25.1% of shares, which, if you remember the Lufthansa case last time, in the bailout agreement, the German government has agreed to have an option of increasing their stakes up to 25.1% in order to prevent foreign takeovers of Lufthansa. So this share, it is indeed quite substantial. And also for the next board, very important, and to understand from British Airways perspective, some of their moves, or to explain some of their moves that they have made. The main UK competitor for the IAG and thus for British Airways is Virgin. The main company, of course, so there's Virgin, and then there's Virgin Virgin Atlantic, which is having flights, intercontinental flights, especially towards the US, but also towards other continents. There used to be also Virgin Australia, which has been was filed for bankruptcy. And Virgin as such, of course, is a really big company chaired by multi-billionaire Richard Branson from the UK. So yeah, with that being said, I'll switch to another board and we'll explain to you more in depth what the situation recently has been with British Airways and what are the issues at this moment. Well, here we have now the second board where I will explain to you what has been happening in the last weeks and actually months, because this has been going on since more or less 6 weeks, maybe a little more, where British Airways, right from the get-go of the crisis, pretty quickly started to use the government furlough scheme, which means that, again, if you remember me explaining the furlough system in one of the earlier videos, I think it was with the United States case, with the US case, there the furloughing is not sacking people, relieving them of their contracts for forever, for a clear longer term time, but there was the government scheme that allowed companies such as British Airways to give not to employ some of their employees, and that those employees would be paid for a limited amount of time by the government until it was clear how the restructuring at British Airways was going to take place. Now, one of the important things to mention here, as you remember the last board, their main competitor is Virgin. And Virgin pretty early mentioned that it was quite clear that they wanted to ask for a bailout of around about 500 million euros. And that was apart now from the British case, from the British Airways case, that was met by a lot of criticism in social media and all around, saying that how come an airline that is spearheaded by one of the countries for sure, but also one of globally of the richest entrepreneurs that there is, why did they ask for government money? But British Airways said from the beginning, we don't want the taxpayer to come up with a solution, we make it in-house. As that was PR-wise quite noble, it seemed at the beginning, but it was pretty quickly quite clear that that was more or less a PR gimmick, to be honest. Because at the same time, in the IAG group, the other major airline, Iberia, was saying, well, we need a bailout from the Spanish government. The Spanish government agreed on a bailout of around about 1 billion euros, and they couldn't ask for this bailout, Iberia, and they couldn't receive it without the go-ahead of the International Airlines Group, so the parent company over British Airways and Iberia. So if that was possible in the Iberia's case, why wasn't it possible in British Airways' case? Well, the only difference is that Virgin is a far fiercer competitor in the UK market than any other competitor in the Spanish market for Iberia, so there isn't much leeway for argumentation there. But right away, British Airways announced the clear risk for almost a third of its workforce of 42,000. That they said about 12,000 jobs are at risk. And that was happening before even any sort of negotiations began with the trade unions, which is why most of the trade unions, especially the 2-3 biggest ones, were saying we are not even going to enter in these kind of negotiations. We are going to enter negotiations which are balanced and with a clean starting point, and not starting before starting even negotiations, having already such a clear position by an official position, especially by British Airways. So most of the trade unions, especially those of the pilots, did not even participate in first rounds of negotiation, and said that they were seeking legal claims and pathways to see if the way British Airways was doing things was even legal, and in any case they refuted also morally, from a moral standpoint, to enter negotiations upon such declarations, which they deemed as immoral, and in a time where not only the company but also the workers were really desperate. That was not a good starting point. So most trade unions were not even included in negotiations, and that became pretty viral. There were also several cases of employees who didn't know what their future would hold, who were in really big trouble, who were even 2 or 3 cases of attempted suicides, that happened because they couldn't bear the uncertainty of what might happen with their contracts. And then quite recently, in the last around 2 weeks, there was another even harsher strategy applied by British Airways, who said, if the trade unions are not going to come and discuss, and if we're not going to reach an agreement, we could also so much as terminate all 42,000 workers' contracts and rehire them with clearly worse contracts and worse pay, worse conditions, etc. And all under the auspices, all under the argumentation that these are unprecedented times, and in unprecedented times, unprecedented measures have to be taken, otherwise they couldn't survive. And always the main answer was, we try now, no decision is final, and we try to save as many jobs as possible. But well, the strategy was as it was. And so while that became more and more viral and more public, the government and several government officials and several members of British Parliament started to threaten BA. Basically, the argumentation was, on one hand, the government scheme was not meant for companies to use that in order to just delay the inevitable and later fire the same people anyway. It was to save jobs and not to just, again, prolong the inevitable. So they went against their strategy, and they also then threatened them with looking into the legal possibilities of even taking away from them some of the slots that they have currently at Heathrow Airport and London Airport. You remember I mentioned the slot problematic and the slot issue with Lufthansa in the last video, which I will link above and also in the description of the video, so you can follow that as well. So yeah, apart from that, also the government has, on a side note, but this is important as well, put forward some new restrictions or prolonged restrictions regarding the coronavirus, because they said that still in the next weeks to come, there should be any person who enters the UK should be quarantined for 14 days, which was met by heavy resistance, this time by British Airways, International Airlines Group. And so now we are in a situation where actually it's basically British Airways versus everyone, or everyone versus British Airways, because on one hand, it's the prolonged battle between BA and the trade unions. Those who are not taking part in negotiations, who seek legal claims, and even the pilot union who is taking part in negotiations are also saying they're hanging now by a very thin thread, because they said that originally the offer or the starting point was for about 1,300 jobs to be maybe maybe on the stumbling block, on the block. But on the other hand, now they say that within negotiations, now there were even threats that if that offer was not by British Airways, that if that offer was not accepted, they would so much as again revert to the firing of up to 4,000 pilots, and again rehiring them under worse conditions. So so on one hand it's that battle, on the other hand it's also the government threatening BA, and BA at the same time also today and yesterday it was published that British Airways as the leading company, but also supported by the low carriers also based in the UK, Ryanair and EasyJet, would follow them as well in filing legal questions and legal procedures against the government regarding the COVID restrictions. So now it's a really, really hectic and really open situation to all sides. And now I will change the board one last time and tell you what I make of this. Yeah, so let's talk about that. What am I making of this? So first and foremost, I have to say it's clear for me, just as this kind of disclaimer, that not only in this case, but in general now, in a lot of different fields of economy, of general life, and the airline industry is no stranger to that. There are no immediate winners to these situations. Everyone who is somehow affected by this corona crisis and its effects is somehow mostly affected in a bad sense. So there are no immediate winners here. So I'm clear about it that in the end of this, there will not be. It's not possible in the short and midterm to say, well, there were no firings at all, or in the other hand, that there were no cuts necessary for airlines. Maybe all these bailout series videos show that even though nobody could really predict such an outbreak and such a huge scale effects for the airline industry, maybe still the way how the airlines were structured and the sheer size of them was maybe already a bit out of proportion. But that putting aside, I do believe that one of the ways that I would quote unquote judge these bailouts or how airlines are dealing with this difficult situation, it's in a way a matter of respect, mutual respect, but in this case especially respect as a legacy carrier, flag carrier, employing such a huge workforce, respect, and with such a huge history, respect to their long-time workers and long-time workforce, and honesty in some way as well. Which I guess you can say, well, they have been honest right out of the gate and said 12,000 jobs could be in danger, but that connected with the respect needed. I do believe that there would have been another way in doing this, and not putting it just out there as an imposing threat before even starting any negotiations and any discussions internally. That's not the way I think is right, and therefore that was also the main thing, as far as I read, also lots of interviews with BA staff, that it was not the case that they were saying we can't imagine why they would fire or why jobs would be at risk, but it was rather the way how it was communicated, how seemingly they were not in the discussion from the beginning, and only after that initial declaration they said, well, now let's talk about it. So that's why I think that the strategy of BA and how they handled it has lacked that kind of respect. And I think that's why it's brought about so many waves of frustration and indignation and sheer reaction from lots of sides. And also one thing that I guess has not really been part of the negotiation or not part of the articles that I've read about it is also the looming question of Brexit. As negotiations, the further the year goes, the clearer it becomes that the impasse that there still is in the Brexit talks is becoming more and more urgent, and nobody really knows exactly how Brexit maybe also will affect this as well. So that's like an added question that most of the other countries don't have, as Brexit is very clearly on Great Britain, so on British Airways as well. So to end here, what I would say is that what I would hope at least, what I would see as the best possible outcome that I really again hope for, is that amidst all the problems that especially the government has with British Airways, the British Airways with the government, and one of the major points of the government against British Airways was in their argumentation was to protect British workforce. So I would guess that with the COVID restrictions that the government has put out, with all what's on the table, I guess that the best possible outcome would be for the government somehow accepting a certain type of job cuts, but far lower, hopefully, than what British Airways has said. Also lowering the effects on the work conditions of these of the staff that stays, and have as few workers as possible having to agree to worse working conditions, if at all. And on the other hand, then not even asking, but giving British Airways money from the state and basically to the International Airlines Group, and to safeguard with that money and with guarantees that what the government is asking, BA is going to comply with, and at the same time not taking away any slots, landing and starting slots for BA, not any further sanctions. But I think some kind of deal in that direction would hopefully be the best possible outcome, because again, I guess cuts will be inevitable. But yeah, I hope that those two, and then of course in the end the trade unions have to agree, the trade unions have to comply as well. But I guess that if those two can agree on this, I think also the trade unions will see that that would be the best possible outcome, I guess. But yeah, let me hear what you have to say about it. And yeah, that's it for this board. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, please feel free, and would make me very happy if you like and or subscribe. If you subscribe and would like to know when the next video is up, please click the notification button as well. And yeah, hope you liked it again, and hope to see you in the next video. And yeah, stay tuned. Bye bye.